Hey guys, Trevor and CJ. Just thought we'd do a quick intro video. We're about to go on the Port Arthur Essentials Tour walkabout with a guide, which obviously gives us I think it's a 45-minute talk on a bit of history to do with Port Arthur. And that'll be part one. Then we're going to go on a separate walk. Actually, it's a cruise, isn't it?
It is. It's a cruise, the second one. It's
Isle of the Dead, I think. Island of the Dead.
Island of the Dead, and it's some history of the buried convicts and soldiers, I think, on an island and their burial sites.
Yeah.
That'll be part two.
Yeah.
So.
And it goes for 40 minutes as well, plus a 20-minute cruise around the actual estuary, I suppose, where they talk about different landmarks. And then we'll do a part three, which is just going to be us doing a quick walk around of the different sites, plus the photo slideshow of our day at Port Arthur.
Thanks for watching, guys.
Bye.
Like and subscribe. Thank you.
47 years. The Aboriginals here thousands of years. So, but when the convict settlement began in 1830 here, ran from 1830 till 1877 as a male-only convict station, a punishment station. I'll explain that later. In 1830, they set up guards at Eagle Hawk Neck, where you came down that big hill and there's water on either side there. It's only 100 metres wide there, so they could easily guard that strip of land. And they also had guards at Dun Alley, where you drove over a bridge and there was a canal there. Just right there, there were guards along there because it's 400 metres between the two bits of ocean. Most convicts couldn't swim. So if you could guard the land, you had most of them sorted, so they couldn't swim. And there are white pointer sharks out here and eating the seals that are on the rocks out there. And so the convicts were told that. So they were frightened of going in the water anyway. Some of them could swim, and a couple who could swim did actually escape through swimming, but most couldn't. Now, when they closed off those two areas through having guards there with dogs and guns, what that meant was the Aboriginal people who lived here couldn't pass through that area either. And so they used to migrate each year from, this was their winter area here, and then in summer they'd go into the middle of Tasmania up into the highlands there, and they would have found one year they wouldn't have been able to come back because of these guards there. But also at that time, by 1830, there weren't very many Aboriginals left actually anyway, so the population had succumbed to disease largely, but also being attacked as well. That's mostly disease. So that's people often wonder, were Aboriginals out here? Yes, they definitely were. They were called the Paiderama Pit. Now the other story that's outside the convict one, that's the big history story here, is the massacre that happened in 1996. So 1996, and most of that happened right here behind us, only 30 metres behind you, right there. That's where the cafe was, the Broad Arrow Cafe, behind that hedge. And that is a memorial garden. So 35 people lost their lives on that day in 1996. And so if you're interested in that or want to pay your respects, there's the gardens right there. The rest of the talk is going to be about convicts now. Okay, so this sign, the reason I'm in front of this sign is particularly because of this photo, which was taken in 1860 there, and Port Arthur ran as a prison until 1877. So this is well inside the still being a convict's prison at that time. And you can see there are a whole lot of buildings there on that hill that aren't there today up there. And it's just the ones in white here that are left. All those ones in yellow are no longer here. And the reason they're no longer there, well, there are several reasons. The main one is that when the last commandant, when he closed the place in 1877, he got the order to dismantle a lot of the buildings and send the building materials into Hobart to be reused in there, particularly the military buildings which are up here. So this is the barracks, this is where all the soldiers lived, up here. The soldiers lived there. And the officers were in these lower buildings down here. The only thing remaining is that guard tower, which is there. You can see still there. They left the guard tower. So the military buildings got taken away. what they did with the other buildings was they put them all up for auction, and they were all sold, except for this one. This one wasn't sold because it never met the auction price. Nobody offered enough money for it, and so that remained in government hands. But in 1897, it burnt down in a bushfire that came through, and for a lot of the buildings were destroyed in that bushfire, even privately owned ones, because the ones that were left sold off to people. They had wooden shingle roofs, which you can see in that photo. That's why they burnt, wooden shingle roofs. And the convicts were making the wooden shingles. It was one of the businesses here. Mostly it was a timber operation. They were cutting down trees and making them into planks, or they were making shingles out of them. Different wood for different reasons, different purposes. What else? Oh yeah, the only other building that didn't sell was the church up there on the hill. They never auctioned that. That was there for the community here, this became a town. After Port Arthur closed, the prison closed, it became a town, and people used that church, but it too burnt down much later. Only actually a few years after it closed, in 1884, so not much later. But so there were several fires. There were 3 fires: the church fire and 2 bushfires. Okay, let's move on over here. This is a private toilet, so no conflict. I said a moment ago, they were logging here. Logging was probably the thing that most convicts were doing, and it was these trees, stringy barks. They were using these, and they made the shingles from these, but they were also cutting down. You can see a couple of trees there. They're Tasmanian blue gum trees. Those 3 in a row just there. They have those marks on them, and the blue gum trees have long strips of bark hanging down off them. There are a couple of really big blue gum trees over there in front of the Commandant's house. They're 180 years old, those two. They were planted in 1840. So that's what the convicts were doing, cutting down trees like that, cutting them into 12-metre lengths, and then carrying them out of the forest on their shoulders, and carrying them for several kilometres. Like from that hill up there, they were logging on that hill, they'd carry them on their shoulders. The logs weighed up to 2 tonnes, and they'd have groups of 20 or 30 of them, depending on how big the log was, carrying the logs. That's what the convicts were doing day in, day out, carrying logs out of the forest. There are wallaby scats. The poos you can see on the ground there, they're paddy melons. They're little wallabies about this big. This place is full of wallabies at night. So you can see out over there, there's a little island that's called the Isle of the Dead, and that is where that's the cemetery for Port Arthur, and 1,100 people approximately are buried on that little island. And you can do a tour on that island if you want today. You will be going on a boat trip on that boat there, that's the Marana, and that'll go around the harbour there, and if you want to, you can get off it and do a tour on that island. So it's your choice. It's an extra cost, but that's a tour of the cemeteries there. The point over there is called Point Pure, and that was the boys' prison. So in England, before the convicts were coming to Australia, men, women and children were all kept in the same prisons, in the same cells together. So that's a recipe for abuse, really, particularly for the weak people, the children and the women. And so here, this was a male-only prison. The women were in South Hobart at the Cascades Women's Factory. Here, the boys and the men were together for the first few years, and they decided that they should separate them and make a boys' prison. And this was the first time anyone had thought of this in the British Empire. The very first boys' prison in the British Empire is here, on that little point there. And it's one of the reasons we got World Heritage status here, because of that. It has international significance, that boys' prison. Now, all the buildings are gone. They dismantled them. It only lasted for 15 years. They dismantled the buildings. They brought all the building material back here because it's so hard carving out all this rock. They're not just going to leave it there. They're going to use it again. Now, the reason they closed it down was because it was such a good idea. They decided to do it in Britain, and they set up a boys' prison in Britain, and so they didn't need to send them out here anymore. And they were aged from 9 to 15, the boys. And when they turned 16, then they were an adult, and then they got sent over here. So one of them, a guy called James Lynch, he was 7 years old in Britain, and he got caught for stealing 2 boxes of toys, and he got 7 years for that. And he came out here, he was 9 years old. He was on that point over there, and he got in trouble lots of times, just like all the boys did, and they did actually get flogged, the boys, not as much as the men, but they did. They didn't get whipped as many times, but they did get whipped. They had all the same punishments as the adults. And James Lynch did his 7 years, and when he finished, he was 16, because he was 9 when he started. He did 7 years sentence, so he was an adult. So he spent his entire childhood here in prison. Yeah, and then he gets released in Hobart, and he's an adult. And an adult who's a fully trained criminal by the time he gets out of here, because he spent his whole life in prison surrounded by other criminals. So that's what it was like a school for criminals, they said in here.
Wow.
And they tried to train them out of that. They tried to train them in other skills. So boat making and ship building, stone masonry, all the industry that was going on here was done by convicts. They did all of the work, but they were training other convicts, particularly the boys, in those skills, trying to train them into a trade so they wouldn't go back to crime. Yeah, so there was a positive side to Port Arthur. If you just come over here to the water's edge, please. Two things people often ask about: why is the water so green here? Particularly at some angles you get this really beautiful green. It's because of the algae in the water. It's probably also that seaweed, but it's algae that's floating in the water that makes it green like that. But the reason I'm really here is the oysters. These oysters just grow naturally around here, and I'm sure the Aboriginal people would have got into them. There's a freshwater creek right here, so this is great. There's fresh water, there's oysters, and what happened when people often ask, did anyone escape? Well, actually, there was about 400 escape attempts, approximately 400 escape attempts, and some of them really did go all the way, and they got away. Others got recaptured, but there was 400 escape attempts. But there's very little permanent fresh water here on the peninsula. This creek here is one of the permanent freshwater creeks. There's a couple of other ones. And so when convicts escaped, the guards got in a boat and just rowed to the next freshwater creek around there, or the one around that way, because they know that's where they would be. And there's oysters there as well, because this is one of the only foods they can eat if they escape, because you can't catch those wallabies. If you come here tonight and run around trying to catch those wallabies, you'll see they're very fast. And so a convict who's probably really hungry and exhausted is not going to be able to catch a wallaby unless they've stolen a gun. If they've stolen a gun as well, yeah, then they can catch a wallaby. But oysters, so if you had oysters but no fresh water, then you'd be looking for fresh water after a couple of days, because they're pretty salty. And so actually a lot of convicts who escaped handed themselves back in a couple of days later. Yeah, hungry, cut up feet, and really thirsty.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah, so there you go. So this freshwater creek here, this big harbour, the big trees that I talked about, like those two there in front of the Commandant's house. You can go into the Commandant's house, by the way. It's open. There's 3 talks in there. There's furniture in there. The big trees are a reason why it was here at Port Arthur. The fresh water, it's only 1 day's sail from Port Arthur, from Hobart, so it's close. And what's the other reason? Oh yes, the peninsula, the double peninsula, so it's a natural prison. So that's why Port Arthur was chosen. The first 3 years, from 1830 to 1833, it was a small camp, less than 60 people here. There was 60 by the end, 1830. 33, there was 60, but it just started out with about 30 people. Tiny camp, just camping in tents, getting timber, the timber camp. And when they decided to close Sarah Island on the west coast, which was another punishment station, Maria Island north of here, which was a punishment station, and Norfolk Island, which is right out in the Pacific, they closed all three of those at different times. All those convicts got sent here. And suddenly the population went from 60, under 100, to over 1,000. There was, in a very short time, 1,200 convicts arrived and a regiment of 100 soldiers. So the population went right up. They had to build all these buildings, put in infrastructure, and work towards making it what it is today. When it first started, it was just some guys camping by this creek in tents.
Wow.
And they decided to really invest in it. And so this place ran for 47 years as a prison, and it had 7,500 convicts came through it. But 165,000 convicts came to Australia. So only 5% of convicts actually came here to Port Arthur. This is not normal for convicts. Only the convicts who are really breaking the rules, who are misbehaving, get sent to these punishment stations. Just the 5% of worst behaved convicts are here. Most convicts are on assignment. They call it assignment, being assigned to farmers or businesses as free labour out there in the community. So 95% of convicts are out there in the community because the whole of Australia is the prison.
Yeah.
So they can be there, they can be there. They're still, even if they escape from here, in a way, they're still in the prison. They're just not where they should be. They just need to get them back in here. But this was maximum security here. So most convicts didn't have this kind of security. And the punishment here was much more severe than what was happening to other convicts, because they wanted this to be a deterrent to all those other ones, so they behaved well.
Yeah. Makes sense.
And they also had incentives here. If you behaved well, you could get released early.
Okay.
And released back into the community. In fact, after only doing half your sentence or 2/3 of your sentence, depending on the commandant, they could release you with a ticket of leave, and you'd be free to move around the colony as long as you had your bit of paper with you, and you could even work and get paid for it and start building a life.
Yeah.
So for many convicts, it was actually a good fortune to be sent to Australia as convicts, because life in Britain was horrible. There was a lot of poverty. There were no opportunities for poor people. It was all of the land was wrapped up. There was no, if you're really poor, that was it. You were just stuck in a horrible situation. Whereas Australia was a fresh new start, and you literally could buy land, set up your own farm, set up your own business. Yeah. Okay. Not to say it was wonderful, like brutal, the convict system, but there were opportunities if you behaved.
Better than the NHS.
Yes, that's right. Now this land we're walking on right now is all reclaimed land. There are big logs under here. We dug down hundreds and hundreds of tree logs under here. The convicts carried the logs down from that hill, dumped them all under here, and then put gravel over them. So all of this flat land right through here is all reclaimed. This was all swampy land.
Wow.
So here's the evidence of the convicts doing that work, carrying the logs. It's right under you there. But most of the logs, thousands of them, went onto ships and went back to Britain or to Sydney or to Melbourne, Hobart for building. This is a tidal creek, so it's salty here, but it's fresh up there further. Just come off the track a little bit. We'll just congest the... I'm just letting you know that if you were here in the middle of summer, there'd probably be 30 people on this tour, or even more. We can get up to like 60 on these tours. So
glad we're not here in summer.
You're getting a much more personal, intimate sort of riding.
Absolutely.
And I'm happy to take questions if you've got questions. Now, just over here to your left, where that bird's sitting on that rock there, that was a crane for lifting goods off boats, because there was a jetty right there. The jetty ran from the shore over here, about where that bench is, right across to see that stone jetty right out there on the point.
Yeah.
And that stone jetty went right out on a wooden structure right out into the water there, and you could walk right across the water, right to where that bird's on that rock, all the way out to that jetty. That was all covered in a wooden structure there.
Wow.
And actually, it might even show it in this photo. It only shows a little bit of it, you can't really see it. But this was a really busy area. This is where all the convicts arrived and left from here. This is where they got on and off the boats, right there. And this is where the storage areas for the warehouses were there. All the food, tobacco, alcohol, clothing, all that stuff that the convicts would want to steal was in there. And the convicts did break in and steal stuff, because a lot of the convicts were thieves and burglars, so they really knew how to break into places. And they literally did. So they could get, they were rationed the amount of tobacco, but they wanted to get more, of course. They'd break in there, they could. And that is why the guard tower is right over that area. This is the whole jetty area and the storage area. The soldiers are right there, the commandant's looking straight over it. That little corner there was the honey pot right there. And these little buildings here with the little glass turrets on them, they're called the warden's huts, and they were also guarding this area. This big building here is called the penitentiary. At the time, it was the largest building in Tasmania, and definitely is the largest building on site here. And it was built in 1845 as a granary and flour mill, because they had bread for breakfast, lunch and tea. Breakfast and tea, they had bread and porridge. Lunch was their big meal. They had bread, salted meat, turnips, potatoes and cabbages, and they grew that here, the vegetables, and that's what they had every day. So bread and porridge morning and evening, but meat and veggies for lunch, and bread with each of those. So they needed a lot of bread, because at the high point of Port Arthur there was about 2,000 people here, so that's 6,000 meals a day. That's a lot of bread. Yeah. And so the commandant had to manifest that somehow, and it was very isolated, and so they were bringing all that in. So he decided, let's set up our own granary and flour mill, and we'll make our own flour, we'll grow our own wheat. Couldn't grow wheat very well here, they had to bring that in, but they were grinding it in there. There was a big wheel there where that third set of windows along, there was a big wheel sticking right through the wall there. You can see they've kind of patched the wall up a bit. The wheel actually stuck through the wall. It was 10 metres diameter, the wall, the wheel, a water wheel, and there was a big dam up on the hill there. Water came down, turned the wheel. But it doesn't rain all the time here in Australia, and particularly on the east coast of Tasmania it doesn't rain. West coast it does, but it's drier here. And so the wheel didn't turn all the time, and so they put another wheel next to it called a step wheel or a tread wheel, and the convicts were in there walking in that, or literally running in that, turning that when there wasn't water.
Wow.
And there'd be a dozen convicts doing that at a time, and they'd switch every 15 minutes. And so they did this for 3 years, and they decided it's just not working, this idea. So they closed it down. They just started importing their flour from Sorel, which is the town that you drove through on the way here. There was a big flour mill there, and that's where wheat was grown around there. And they closed it down, and it took them several years to work out what to do with it, surprisingly, and so it was empty. And then they realised, let's turn this into the new cell block. Okay. Because the convicts were originally over here, and we'll go over there now. So this was not the original cell block. The cell blocks were low wooden huts that were over here. I'll show you a photo of them. So it's not until the 1850s that they move in here. And these all the convicts are only kept in there overnight. In the morning, they all come out on this parade ground here, and they are assigned to their work for the day. But on Sundays,
got eggs.
We'll go around this
Yeah, so I think she's on eggs.
We're leaving.
Yes.
We're leaving.
So
yeah, I do.
they're only in there overnight. In the morning, they come out, in the program, they'll be told what work they're doing during the day. And that was part of their punishment, was if they behaved well, they would get better jobs to do. And if they behaved badly, they'd be doing the terrible jobs like carrying the logs out of the forest. That was one of the worst ones to do.
Yeah.
A lot of the convicts had chains on their ankles. That was a form of punishment, and the chains weighed between 2 kilos and 18 kilos.
Wow.
So you could, they could put different weights on you depending on how much you needed to be punished. But most convicts didn't actually have chains on them. But if you did do something to deserve chains, maybe you're trying to run away too much. That's probably the main reason. They were put on by the blacksmith, not with a lock and key. Just the blacksmith put a hot rivet on them. So not to burn you, but that's just how they joined them. And that meant no one was getting them off because they weren't coming off until the blacksmith took them off. And so if you got assigned to wear chains for 2 months, they were on you day and night for 2 months, sleeping, everything. They even had special pants with buttons up the outside so they could take their pants off, like stripper pants. Apparently. I wouldn't know that. But, this was the kitchen and bakery. You can go in there. That's where they bake their bread. There's ovens in there. Go in there later. This is where the blacksmith operated right here. They had a forge, a foundry. They had carpentry here. They were doing making wagon wheels, all that kind of stuff. They were even making their own nails by hand. Some poor guy was making individual nails by hand. Imagine doing that all day.
No thanks.
Because they found the nails here. They know that someone was doing that.
Wow.
Yeah, and here's a little picture. You can see where they. So these huts are here, but they, as I said, buildings all got sold off and auctioned. So the buildings might have got taken away, or they might have got burnt in the fires. In the 1890s, there was a fire in '95 and one in 1897. It even says, does it say it there? Mentions. Oh no. No, they didn't say. They were just demolished afterwards. These ones weren't burnt, but there were 2 fires. Okay, we'll keep coming this way. Well, we're making really good time.
You're a great speaker, Colin.
Oh, thank you. I used to be a university lecturer. I was an art school lecturer for 16 years, so I used to talking to people. Yeah. That's why I transitioned to this. This is my slide into retirement. This job. Yeah.
Nice.
So, yeah, it is nice being paid to just do this. It's great. Yeah, it's really nice. Okay, so that building up on the hill there is the hospital, and they had 80 beds in that hospital. There's an interesting little house just right up on the hill there. That was originally the hospital for the soldiers and officers, but they turned that into a house for political prisoners. And if you're interested in that, you can go in there. There's a whole lot of information in there. They were mostly Irish political prisoners who were pushing back against the English taking over Ireland, but also there were some Canadian political prisoners were kept in there. They had a little slightly different experience of being here. They were kind of gentlemen in the way. They were treated differently to the rest because they were educated people. So if you were an educated convict, you had a different experience. If you could read and write, you generally got a job as a clerk or something, and you weren't carrying the logs out of the forest. But most people started out carrying the logs, but when they learned if you had skills that were useful, they would take you out of that, and you'd have. So if you were educated, you had a lot better experience. Many of the really educated guys who were here as convicts were people who were convicted of fraud, actually. So they were writing fake checks and things like that. Yeah. Most convicts, though, were pickpockets or burglars, or just stealing stuff, because it was really bad poverty back in England, and they just had to survive. Although some of them were actually professional criminals as well, I'll say that. So there's no one size fits all for the convicts, though. They're all kinds of different people. The hospital, as I said, had 80 beds, had professional doctors in there, but at one point early on, They didn't have a doctor here for a while, and so the best thing they could find was one of the convicts, because the convicts did everything here. They built everything, they made all of the bricks, they carved all of the stone, they quarried it, they carried everything. One of the convicts had done 2 years medical training to become a doctor, but he wasn't a doctor. He'd only done the first 2 years of training, but they said, well, you're good enough, and so he became the doctor for the site. And he didn't really properly know what he was doing because he'd only had 2 years training. So imagine it'd be pretty stressful for him because he's dealing with all kinds of illnesses that he doesn't know. You know, he's prodding around someone's body going, oh, I don't know what that is, does it hurt there? But so he had to perform all kinds of operations and things, and he didn't really know what he was doing. But I mean, he was good, he did as well as he could. But several of the early doctors complained that the equipment was terrible. They didn't have any anaesthetic here until 1847. So the first 17 years, no painkiller, except rum, I guess. But other than that, no anaesthetic and no antiseptic either. And they reused bandages, so they just boil the bandages up and reuse them again. A lot of people don't like that. And for a while they had no anaesthetic and no antiseptic or ointment, and they just used animal fat for wounds. So if you had a big cut, they just put animal fat over it. You'd think, is that the right thing to do? But yeah, it seals it. Now, we know that there was a convict who tried to escape and got shot in the arm while trying to escape, and his arm had to be amputated, and that was without anaesthetic. And the doctor did the whole operation. The commandant witnessed it all and wrote it in his diaries. This is how we know about it. He wrote about it that evening, so we've got a real direct account of it. And he said that the doctor performed the whole operation in 10 minutes. Cutting his arm off, removing the bones, stitching it all up, cauterizing it. Now, cauterizing it doesn't mean burning the whole open flesh. They just burnt the just the arteries and veins. Yeah, they just burnt those blood vessels, and then they'd stitch it up and put the old animal fat on and all of that, but no anaesthetic. And at the end of the commandant's diary entry, it says, "And the convict handled it in a very manly fashion." So that means, I suppose, he didn't cry out too much, but how could you not with that? He might have just fainted. I would have fainted. That would be
100%.
way out, yeah. So the hospital was a place of pain and suffering. Let's head this way. So as I said, Port Arthur closed in 1877. The buildings were sold off, and a lot of private tourist businesses started here. So right up until the 1970s, this was run by private tourism operators here at Port Arthur. They bought some of these buildings, turned them into hotels, a bit like today's Airbnbs, kind of. And they turned some of these houses into hotels, and people lived here. This was just a town, had kids on bikes, and they had a school. Yep.
Whose decision was it to close Port Arthur?
Oh, they closed. Oh, good. Thank you. Nice question. So they closed Port Arthur in 1877 because they were running out of convicts, and they moved the final 200 that were here. So at the high point there was 2,000, but the final 200 who were here, they moved them into Hobart, into the prison there. There was a penitentiary in Hobart. The main reason they closed it down because of the lack of convicts was because there were no new convicts were sent into Tasmania after 1853, because the people in Tasmania, the community, all voted to say they didn't want convicts to be sent here anymore. It was like they were the dumping ground for the worst people in the British Empire. They had had enough. Ironically, 2/3 of the population of Tasmania were ex-convicts. So these are the ex-convicts voting to say we don't want convicts coming here. They are convicts. That was the case. They were all trying to escape their convict past. And so they did that. But there were still thousands of convicts in Tasmania. So any one of those who broke the law could still be sent here. So And the last convicts into Australia was 1868.
And was that a British policy change?
Yes, it was. In 1868, they said, right, we're not sending. And this was the public in Britain didn't want convicts sent out anymore because they were being separated from their families. And the last convicts were sent to Western Australia in Fremantle. So both New South Wales and Tasmania both went, we don't want any more convicts. So they ended up sending them to WA. So people in Australia didn't want the convicts anymore, but also people in Britain didn't want it, so they shut it down, the whole system. But that was 1868, but this place ran till 1877, so 9 more years after they'd stopped sending convicts here. It still kept running because it was still a prison, and you had plenty of people here still doing their sentences, particularly the guys doing life sentences, they were still here. So right at the end, you've just got old guys mostly who've been here a long time, who are doing life sentences, and they can't actually do much work because their bodies have had it. They've been living off porridge and bread for 30 years or whatever, and working really hard. And so it actually becomes more of a welfare station for damaged old men. And you can just see a bit of bricks over there. That's the welfare station, and at the end of Port Arthur there was over 200 ex-convicts all living in there. So they had as many ex-convicts here as still prisoner convicts. So the ones who were so damaged they couldn't live in the town, they couldn't get a job or anything, they looked after them here.
It's very Shawshank Redemption.
Yeah, that's right. It became, if you follow me now, it became a welfare station. Yeah. Up there's the church. There's 3 talks and measuring today. So religious education was really important, as well as trade education, so they're teaching them trade skills, that was important. But there was also a whole domestic civil world up there. Those houses, they're all convict era houses. People were living in those, the reverend, the accountant, the doctor and so on, all those people, they had families. And so those houses, some of them are open, you can go into those. But if you look at this sign here, check the time. Yep. This sign here shows the original convict accommodation. Those long, low huts, and they were here on these flat bits of grass. So for the first 20 years, this is where the convicts lived, right here. And it wasn't until the 1850s, early 1850s, that they moved into that building there. And they had to change the building from being a big storage area for grain and flour and that big wheel. They took all that down out of that building and they turned it into the cell blocks. The reason it's all looking horrible like that is because of the fires that came through. I think I mentioned that at the start. So this is the original area for the convicts, is right here, but as I said, lots of fires came through, things burnt. The other thing that happened here was the flogging. So they had lots of forms of punishment here. The hard labour was the main form of punishment. That was 6 days a week. They didn't work on Sundays because of religious reasons, but 6 days a week they worked really hard, much harder than convicts out in the normal community. You can imagine carrying those logs. They weighed up to 2 tonnes and they'd carry them up to 2 kilometres away. Wow. So that hill up there, all the way down here, carrying several tonnes of log on your shoulders with chains on your ankles. So, and then you dump it here, then go back and get another one. So really terrible work. And all the rocks, all the bricks, everything you see, all carried by convicts. There were no bullocks or draft horses here. It was all labour done by the convicts. So the main form of punishment was labour, hard labour, but then if you kept playing up, you'd be put on half rations, so you get half the amount of food that the others were getting. And imagine that after a couple of weeks of that, still having to work, you'd be really exhausted. And then, and that could lead to you getting into further trouble. And so you could have your chains put on you, so you could be wearing chains, half rations, carrying a log, and then if you kept on misbehaving, you could be put in solitary confinement, which actually might be seen as a holiday. So it could actually be okay, solitary confinement, for a short while, but for a long while it'd be bad. And then if you really misbehaved, you'd get flogged with the whip. And that would happen right here. So this is the area, that's why that sign's here. This is the area. They had a tripod, they could move it around. It happened all along this road here. But they did it here so all of the convicts could come out and see it. And they had to witness it because it was a deterrent to the others. And one of the other convicts would have to do the flogging. They had this tripod, they'd take your shirt off, tie you up to it, your hands up to it, and then the commandant would be there, the doctor, they'd all witness it, and you'd get your 25 lashes, or the boys would get more like 10. They'd get a bit less, the boys, but they would still get flogged, the boys. And you get your 25 or maybe 50 lashes, or could even be 75. It was the maximum was 100, but that was relatively rare, and you'd get that for trying to escape.
Yeah.
That was what you get for escaping 100. It was just the standard, so it was a given. So those guys who got hungry and gave themselves back up, remember I said they gave themselves up, they know they're going to get 100 lashes.
Wow.
So hunger's a really strong motivator.
Yeah.
Even if you know you're going to get 100 lashes, you still want to eat something. So they'd be flogged right here, and then if they fainted while being flogged, they were then woken up by the doctor, either a bucket of water or smelling salts or something, and then they'd keep on flogging them, because they never flogged them while they were unconscious, because they couldn't feel that, of course. So no point in doing that. And they'd make sure they got their full amount of lashes that they were prescribed to get. And a lot of those the crimes that they were getting flogged for were just insubordination, insolence, or theft, or refusing to do their work, saying that they were too tired to pick up the log, whatever it was, which they probably were. And there were stories of guys getting sent down from the hill up there, refusing to pick up a log, being sent down here, flogged, and then sent back up to pick up the log with the cuts on their back.
Oh.
Yeah, they'd be sent straight back to work. Here it was 100 lashes maximum, but at Norfolk Island and Sarah Island, the two punishment camps before here, stations before here, they the limit there was 300 lashes. So it was much more brutal in the early days. It gradually got more civilised, and in 1850 they stopped flogging people, and they started a new form of punishment called psychological punishment. And we'll do it over here. Well, we won't do it. Well, you're getting the psychological punishment. So I'm about to wrap up, just letting you know, because I do have to go to another location straight after this. But just wanted to show you, see that log there? Remember I said that they put all these logs under here to reclaim the land? There's one there, there's another one just past the sandbags, and another one past that. They're all about the same size. These are the logs they're carrying out of the forest on their shoulders.
Wow.
Not little logs like that.
Massive.
They actually are the logs that they carried out of the forest. So there they are, we know that's what they were doing. Pretty big.
Incredible.
Heavy. Imagine how heavy they were when they were green and red. Yeah. So they've lasted well, they're hardwood, they've lasted well. But there they are. So they changed the psychological punishment in 1850, and they built a new cell block over there, which is behind those pine trees. It's called the separate prison. Really encourage you to go there, because that is where they had 50 cells, and it was solitary confinement. So they were little cells. They were each in there, not just overnight. They were in there all the time in their cell, 23 hours a day, and just 1 hour a day for exercise. But they had to come out of their cells with a hood over their head, looking at the ground, and go to an exercise, take the hood off their head, exercise in just a single person yard, back and forth, and then back into their cell for the next 23 hours. And they could be put in there for a maximum of 12 months.
Wow.
And in that 12 months, they could potentially go 12 months without speaking to another person or looking another person in the eye. No eye contact, no speaking, no communication using hand signals, no communication. And so that's why it was also called the silent prison. And it was called the separate prison because they called it separate treatment. They would separate them all. And so they'd just be isolated, and they wouldn't get to talk to anyone, just in your own head. And then if you do something wrong in there, the next level of punishment is they have a cell called the punishment cell. They had two of them actually, there's only one still there. You can go in it today. go in there, you can go in it. Has walls a metre thick and 4 doors, and they close all 4 doors. It's total darkness and total silence, and can be put in there for up to 30 days. They just put the food in the door and you get your food, but you'd be in darkness, and meaning you wouldn't know if it's day or night. And so a lot of people go, that'd drive you mad.
It did.
And in the 1860s, they built the asylum right next door. That is that building with the steps going into it there. That was built right next door, the asylum, because there was a steep rise in mental health issues here at Port Arthur. And you can read about that in those 2 buildings. All this information's there. So, pretty horrible place, the separate prison. That's worth going in there and getting a sense of. This was the step up from flogging. They stopped flogging people and then they started putting them in there. So most convicts were still out here working, but if they did something wrong now, they were sent from there. And then in 1877, the place closed down, and they sold the buildings off, and it just turned into a tourist town, really, with private operators, caravan parks, whatever. People came here to get the Port Arthur experience, and then the government bought all of the place back, and then it was actually Parks, the Parks Service bought it back. So this was run by Parks and Wildlife in the 70s, and then they gradually turned into what it is today from then. So there you have it. Now the final thing is that I mentioned that building over there is a welfare station. Right towards the end of Port Arthur, this was really almost a welfare service as much as a prison. They had the asylum, they had the hospital, they had that welfare station there. They were actually looking after all these old damaged ex-convicts here and providing all these services for them. So it was very brutal early on, but actually they were caring for people towards the end because they realised what the system had done to these people, really. So it did shift, and they really did try to reform people through training them and through trying to give them opportunities through their good behaviour to release them early, and through trying to train them in trade skills so they wouldn't go back to life of crime. So there was a positive side to Port Arthur, but definitely it was a brutal place of punishment. I really recommend going into the separate prison. The asylum has a little museum in there, so you can literally see the cat o' nine tails, you can see the chains, their uniforms, all of that's in there. So, and there's a cafe right next door to it, and toilets in case you're interested in that. All over there. But you don't have to go there because you might need to go and get on your boat, which is over there. And that's it for me. I have to go to my next thing. Thank you. I hope you've enjoyed it.
Thank you,
Thanks, mate.
Colin. It was really
Excellent.
informative.
Cheers, guys.
Yeah, really great.
Stay warm.
Thank
See ya.
you.
See you, mate.
Bye-bye.
Much